Good morning, everybody. We're moving into synthesis. Before I get too much into our packet, I do want to remind you or let you know at least that tomorrow will be an asynchronous day. So if you have any questions on any of the material that I'm going over today, please make sure you email me or reach out to me because you will be expected to practice a lot of the information that we're going through today. So just a reminder in case you log on to Zoom or whatever, I'm telling you now that we will be asynchronous tomorrow for your class period. Okay, so I have a couple of documents here. The first one is the sample synthesis prompt and source packet. So when you click on this link, it'll prompt you to make a copy. This way you have your own personal document. That way, if you want to print it as a resource or you just have it in your drive, that way you always have a sample. So this is what the question will look like. You'll have 55 minutes. It's suggested that you spend 15 minutes reading the questions and the actual sources, and there are several of them, and then 40 minutes writing your response. So please use all of the 15 minutes. I mean, there are a lot of sources for you to sort through. And this is what the prompt wording will look like. They'll typically be a contextual paragraph where they give you the topic and kind of what the conversation is around the topic, and then ultimately what you're supposed to do with all of the sources. So for this particular prompt, it's about monuments or memorializing people, right? Memorializing events or people is complex. In some cases, monuments honor moments of great achievement, while in other cases, monuments pay homage to deep sacrifice. A monument's size, location, and materials are all considerations in planning and creating a memorial to the past. Read carefully or carefully read the following 7 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the factors a group or agency should consider in memorializing an event or person and in creating a monument. So there are several parts to this. You have to use at least 3 sources. That is the minimum. And to synthesize means to figure out an argument that spans across multiple sources. It is not summarizing. We do need to know what these sources say, but we need to figure out what all of the information in front of us presents and how we can make sense of all of that information as well. And so it says at this point, you have to develop a position on the factors. What are factors, right? What do people need to consider when memorializing an event and creating a monument? So not only is it for an event or a person, but it's also a monument. So what factors kind of span across those two situations? And so you have 7 sources. You'll notice that within the parentheses, you have how you would cite it. So you're going to need to choose whether you discuss source A and then you'll keep it consistent, or you discuss the Savage source. And that has to remain consistent throughout the essay. So they're all going to be formatted like this. At the top, you'll have their citation information, which is really telling because, number one, you'll look at how it's reputable. You'll also look at about how long ago it was published and in what format. Is it digital, multimodal? Is it a print document? Is it from the Library of Congress, so to speak? You want to look at the types of sources as well, because that also helps guide your direction to figure out what reputable sources you want to use in your argument and your synthesis. So this first one is an excerpt from a book on monuments in Washington, D.C., and they're all relatively short. Nothing will span about, 1 page and a half or so. I think for this particular packet, they all stay to 1 page. You'll also have photos. So this was from the Express Times, I believe. The statue or the monument of Christopher Columbus in Pennsylvania. Then you also have another article. And then sometimes you'll have graphs or you might have political cartoons. So it seems like this one's majority article based, but then they'll break it up and give you a photo as well. Okay, so we're going to look at how we would deconstruct this particular prompt and these sources in our 15 minutes. So the first thing, of course, is reading and annotating through the sources. And what you want to look at in the sources are, what are the key points? Can I summarize it in one or two bullet points? Ultimately, you also need to look at what you need to extract from it. So remember, like, what are the things we have to consider when creating a monument or when creating some sort of statue or any of that. And so when you first get the prompt, you rewrite it in the form of a question. What factors should a group or agency consider in memorializing an event or person? And then what factors should a group consider in creating a monument? So I would always maybe do like a T chart here and put one on one side and one on the other side and kind of figure out what they all have in common. If you're a visual person, if not, rewriting it in questions and then just answering them, figuring out how you could put that together in a thesis. So for each of the sources, you'll see that we've gone through and we've just pulled out important pieces. Now we've typed it on this document, but when you sit down for the exam, obviously you'll have stars next to this information in the source. You might underline some of these phrases or circle them, so that way you can embed evidence that way. So you'll notice that I have quoted phrases in there, because that's probably how I want to use that in my commentary. Again, I'm just kind of marinating on all of this and processing it as I'm going through each of the sources. So, in the photo, obviously it's very brief. I might circle maybe like when the photo was taken or things of that sort. And then you also want to look at what kinds of monuments and statues are being addressed. Are they, historical in terms of American literature or American history? Are they based off of war? Are they based off of accomplishment? You definitely want to look at those as well. And so I didn't necessarily do that in my bullet points, but that's something that once you're done kind of pulling out the phrases or important information for each source, you want to find the trends. You want to find the patterns, because then you can anchor onto that. And remember, you only have 40 minutes to write the essay. So once you've done all that, you do need to decide how you will cite your sources. So you have two different methods to choose from. You can just simply go source A, source B, etc. And if you did your, I think we did this with maybe tolerance last year, or maybe when we did masculinity and femininity, where we looked at all the different sources and advertisements and we titled them that way, if you remember in pre-AP last year. The other option is to just parenthetically note it the same way that it's given to you on the prompt page. So like savage or photo or whatever. Either one is fine, but you have to cite your sources. It will be a huge blow to your grade, to your score, if you don't cite sources, because you have to cite 3 of them. So, how are the scorers going to know whether or not you included 3 sources if they're not cited properly? Outside knowledge may be used, but it's not required. However, when you think about that sophistication point, you want to think about how does your view of the world and the information presented kind of play in how you would synthesize these pieces together. So if you have any sort of outside experience or observations, or something that you've read about before, it would also be really helpful to kind of jot that down so that you remember how you can put all this together. So for me, one of the things I can think about is the recent controversy over whether or not to remove certain monuments dedicated to Confederate soldiers and battlegrounds. So there's also been, conversations about renaming things, but the removal of statues recently within the last year has been something that has been a controversial topic in the news. So when you get to writing the synthesis essay, there's no set way to start it, but obviously establishing your thesis would be the first thing. And so if you answer the questions that you generated as a result of the prompt, that would be a great start. And remember, it has to be defensible, right? It is something that you are going to defend throughout the essay. And remember, it's asking for certain factors. So if you're not listing those factors, then it's not necessarily defensible. Very much like in the rhetorical analysis, if there weren't specified rhetorical choices, then it wasn't defensible. So think about that in your synthesis. There's always going to be something they're asking. Develop a position on this. describing this, mentioning factors or whatever. And all of that is kind of leading you to the defensible part of a thesis. So things to remember. Some prompts will include more than one task. You must address all of them, which is why we really strongly recommend turning them into questions. As a prompt clearly states, you have to have a minimum of 3 sources. If you don't, you will not score higher than a 2 on the commentary. So that's maybe if you get the thesis point no higher than a 3, that's not a qualifying score for this particular essay. So when they say at least 3, 3 is the bare minimum in terms of what to include. The essay should be student driven. So just because you have these sources doesn't mean you're sitting there describing the sources throughout the essay. That's not the point. The point is, here is a whole ton of research. What do you want to say? What do you think is most important? And which sources are the strongest in supporting that position? So beautiful summaries, maybe even elegant walkthroughs of each of the sources that you choose are not good enough for a qualifying score. So again, it could be a beautiful essay. It could be, how this source says this and this source says this, but that is not the point of a synthesis, right? It's not a summary essay. It's a synthesis where you come up with your own response to the conversation and you pull that selected source to help justify what you feel is your position on the matter. Ultimately, a source can only count once toward the required 3. So in one of the articles, it might be quoting someone else. And even if you use that, it doesn't matter. If it came from that page, it's one source. So be mindful of that. And then you need to be consistent in your citation method. So it does need to be either source A, B, etc., or whatever parenthetical information that they already gave you. Okay, so I know that this is quite a bit, and we're going to attack synthesis prompts a whole lot differently than rhetorical analysis, because rhetorical analysis is dependent upon a critical read of the passage, but synthesis is having to be able to go through multiple sources to figure out the strongest argument that you can defend. Okay, and you really might not know what the topic is. You might not really be familiar with monuments or have a big interest in it, but you have to make a concentrated effort going through the sources to extract as much information as you can in order to help you develop a position. And you only have 55 minutes to read, annotate, and write. So based on going through all of that, tomorrow you will be given a new prompt with new sources. And I do want you to practice the deconstruction tomorrow, okay, when you will be doing this asynchronously. So your quick response today is, now that you've seen the rhetorical analysis essay and the synthesis essay prompts, which do you feel will be less difficult? So for some of you that struggle with critical reading and how to be able to analyze a text, this might be better for you because it's an argument, right? You're really figuring out where you're entering the conversation and defending your opinion. And for some of us, it's easier to write opinion-based papers than analytical-based papers, right? Because you're not really analyzing the sources. You're synthesizing them to defend what you feel is the strongest response to the prompt. So 2 very different approaches. If you're more of an analytical person and you're not really good at maybe opinion writing, then maybe the rhetorical analysis will be less difficult for you because it's all there. You can anchor on and make it work to your advantage. But at the same token, if some of you are better about being able to defend your own ideas, then maybe the synthesis might be, easier for you to do, and especially in 55 minutes. All right, folks, don't forget, tomorrow is an asynchronous day where you will practice with the new prompt, okay? If you have any questions today at all, you can text me via Remind, email me, message me on Schoology, and then we'll see you back on Zoom on Friday. Okay, look for my video tomorrow to explain directions on how to complete the deconstruction on your own. Have a great Wednesday.